Hi, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started since things are running a little bit behind, and we will aim to finish up here at 1:45. Welcome to everyone who is hanging around here for the panel. And we're going to get started by having each of the three other panelists introduce themselves, and then I'll introduce myself after that. So let's see. Curtis, you want to get us started?
Sure. So I'm Curtis Heimerl. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Washington. I largely work on community networks in remote and developing regions. Prior work has been in the Philippines and Indonesia, though we're doing a lot more domestic work. We're spinning up some networks in northern Canada at the moment, as well as in Seattle.
Leandro?
Hi, I'm Leandro. I'm from Technical University of Catalonia in Barcelona. I'm also co-chair of the IRTF Gaia working group, and I work on community networks, and recently also on the circular economy and the environmental impacts of networking and computation.
Wonderful. We may need, can you say what the circular economy is? I know what it is, but I suspect we have people in the audience who don't.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's about reusing things and avoiding waste, which is like an environmental problem.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. And Martin?
Yeah, so I'm Martin Casado. I'm actually a venture capitalist at Andreessen Horowitz, and for the last 3 years, I've been standing up with a group, cellular networks in indigenous regions in the United States, primarily the Four Corners region, and we've been very, very active in the last 6 months, standing up in the most hard-hit COVID areas. So, and got a lot of that ongoing right now.
Wonderful. So I'm Ellen Zagura. I'm a professor at Georgia Tech, and I've been doing actually a variety of projects in the computing and social good area, not strictly networking, over about a 10-year period. And recently I've been doing quite a bit of work similar to Martin in indigenous communities in the southwest of the United States, including in the Four Corners area, including in addition to kind of thinking about extending networks, which Curtis and Leandro and Martin all mentioned. I also have some active projects related to trying to map coverage, so understanding better where coverage is and where coverage isn't. You know, in part as a precursor to trying to extend coverage, and also because, you know, if we don't measure it, then we don't know what's working in terms of attempts to improve. So from each of us now, a kind of example of things that we've been doing. For those of you who are listening and want to ask questions, it seems like the chat is, I mean, the Q&A is okay, but not the greatest. So I'm just gonna suggest that you primarily use the Slack channel to ask questions. All right, and I'll be paying attention to that, but as we're waiting for additional questions from the audience, I'm gonna kick us off with some questions that spun up out of our discussion together. So let me start with this one. And it's what drives, when you work in this space, what drives your choice of research topics? And I think the underlying premise is that maybe it's something a little bit different than what drives your choice of research topics when you're working in networking without an explicit, without explicitly prioritizing social good. So if one of you would like to take that question as a start, Curtis, maybe you could take this question.
Sure.
Yeah.
I feel like somewhat of an outlier in this. In UW in particular, has a body of literature in the area, and people in the area, such that I was hired to do work on social good. And I think, you know, I'm super, super lucky to have landed in a place that supports it at such a fundamental level. So there isn't like a push to, oh, I need to do some normal networking work and get published at SIGCOMM to get tenure kind of things. And so my work sort of aligns very directly with those missions. The tension is actually somewhat the opposite, which is when I get excited about something that's not explicitly social good, trying to get my students to do it is a painful process because they came here to do this kind of work. And so, you know, there is an element of picking the program. And again, obviously I'm super lucky in it being so foundational here, where you don't have to necessarily compromise in the same way as someone who's dipping their toes has to.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent point, and perhaps might be a unique experience, as you alluded to, that you were essentially hired to do this. And I would note you're in a very different situation than Leandro and I in terms of stage of career, and Martine, of course, not being in a university setting at the moment. And this question of whether students want to work in an area they feel has social good to it or not is obviously appealing to students is incredibly important part of being able to make progress.
Yeah, I want to briefly call out, I mean, there are other programs, Georgia Tech, of course, being one that hires people like Neha Kumar who work exclusively in these areas. Michigan is another one. So it's one of those things that's kind of a growing bubble. But when I was a student, I remember like a student at UC San Diego who like felt a tension there in between their like main work and their desire to do this kind of work, but they didn't have the faculty support at the time. So things are getting better. And I think that's fantastic. And that is from the leadership of the sort of senior people allowing people like me to get hired.
Yeah, absolutely. Leandro, do you want to comment on problems?
Yeah, I would say a couple of things. One is that usually the environment defines your research. For instance, when I started in our region, there is GIFINET, who is a very well-known community network. And then, of course, you have them nearby, you know them. So we had a privileged access to them. So we could like get not only like data sets, but also have a deeper understanding of how things worked. And then you realize when you look at papers from other groups that have this close access. So we are not in Silicon Valley, so perhaps we don't have access to certain opportunities, but we do have access to others. So I think this is one of the motivations. Of course, sometimes when it comes to getting funding, also the funder defines a little bit what you can do. And finally, what students appreciate depends also on two things. One is that if you can provide them a unique environment to do the research, which gives them a competitive advantage. And of course, what they want to do afterwards. So that also defines if they want to go to industry, working with industry probably is the best way to start a career. So yeah, it depends on the environment very much.
There was a suggestion that I switch to grid mode so that you can see all the panelists at once. I'm going to assume, I didn't realize I had that power. I'm going to assume I've now accomplished it, but perhaps it leaves you, depending on how you view it, also with a few squares with names in them. Okay. Thank you, Marwan, for suggesting that. Let's see. Martine, so your situation is different, of course. And I know, and maybe many people know, but you can remind them that your dissertation work was not about networking and social good, I don't think. And you're clearly doing maybe, I don't know whether this is, I won't psychoanalyze your mixture of venture capitalism and MuralNet, but instead I'll let you kind of, if you want to, comment on how the MuralNet work fits into the set of ways that you're using your technical talents and interests, knowing that it's not the only way you're using them.
Yeah, so I think the perspective I have is a bit unique, which is I've basically worked on one problem now for 4 years, and it's just become a bigger and bigger and bigger problem. And like so many things in life, it started out as this minor irritation, you know, and then you just kind of scratch the irritation. You have like the little thread, and you kind of keep pulling the thread, and like the whole sweater unravels. And that is, listen, I grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona, in the Four Corners region. Actually, like, you know, like most poor people, like right by the forest. And it was odd because if you went, half a mile from my house, there was basically no cell reception for hundreds of miles. And if you actually look at the problem, I just got very interested in the problem. If you look at the problem, it's kind of weird, right? Like we have everything, like we have backhaul, like that came during the Obama administration. It went to all the schools. We can build cell towers really cheaply. People want it. If you ask them, you say, do you want like cell service? They say yes. It was like this kind of this curiosity. And if you then look at the problem writ large, it's just this multifarious complex thing where you need economic solvency, right? Like people aren't going to do this stuff for free. There's a huge policy and compliance component, which is probably taking 70% of our time. So we ended up having to lobby Congress to allow tribes access to EBS spectrum. So like that tribal priority window, like we were like taking Native American tribes and like marching them through Congress just so that they could be like, yes, you can have, spectrum over your land. And then there was the technical thing. Like we knew we could build cell towers for about $10,000 as opposed to like what was quoting from these like local ISPs was like $500,000. And then there's the social community aspect, right? So we had to like go like, we like literally go to like the tribal councils and we sit there and like there are these very slow decision processes and like you have to kind of work and gain trust. And so, it's a very interesting, compelling problem that you can get lost in. And, I'm kind of deep in the middle of it now. And I just can't actually imagine even focusing on another project now just because it's been so encompassing. But, I guess I maybe just stumbled on the wrong rock and I'm still falling.
It's a tough rock, that's for sure. Very hard. So let me take a question from from Slack from Philippa. So since we are technologists, we generally want to use technology to solve problems. How do you guys go about outreach to understand the variety of tech, non-tech issues in regions you're working in, as well as which of those problems are best served by technological solutions? And actually, I think there's a bit of Martine's answered a bit of that, if not explicitly, implicitly. And I guess maybe I'll simply start by saying, and this is consistent with all the projects I've done in the social good space, whether they are networking or some other form of computing, and that is that partnerships and relationships are absolutely central. And perhaps this is also a bit of an answer to the first question about how to choose a problem. I mean, if you don't have a partner and a relationship, then your chances of understanding the space, the socio-technical space, and having a pathway both to knowing what the real problems are and being able to make some kind of progress is just extremely, really almost impossible. So partnerships become extremely important, and relationships over long periods of time become extremely important. I can relate a struggle in this regard. We have some NSF funding that includes TV white space equipment. And we've had a tremendous challenge getting that deployed on a pueblo in northern New Mexico. And to be perfectly honest, we actually don't understand exactly why it's turning out to be so difficult, but it's clear that it's some kind of interpersonal relationships and not whether there are available channels. I mean, it's not a technical problem. It has nothing to do, well, actually, let me take that back a little bit. There may be a perception that TV white space links are still too flaky to be, or the installation is too, is not yet turnkey enough. That may be causing some hesitation. That's not the whole problem. Martine may know more about that problem. So that's to sort of share a personal component of that. Anybody want to grab this question? Leandro, you look like you might have something.
Yeah, I can add two comments. One is that typically as technologists, we bring our bag of tools and then we expect the communities to use them, but maybe it requires some time. There's a process, and maybe this is not really the answer to the current problem. So you need to be able to be there, to be with them, and wait until this your tool becomes the real solution. And well, in all social problems, it takes time. Short time in social terms means a few years, whereas we typically think in few weeks in technology. So, so this is one of the annoying parts, is that our solutions cannot really put there because they are complex, these are complex environments. And the other thing is that each community, each location is different. So there is no solution for all. There is a solution for in a given time, in a given process by a different community. So you need to really, to establish a collaboration and be ready to do something else that you intended to do before you can introduce the thing that you really like it or you want to test. So this is like a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, and I want to briefly jump in to just discuss it in the context of academia, which is, I think we're actually, as networking researchers, we're in a great positive spot. Every time I've turned on a network, there's a line of people. This isn't something like healthcare where there's a big behavior change component trying to convince people that this is a good thing. People want connectivity, but you do have to do these deep engagements. And the tricky piece gets to be when you're a PhD student and you do have this bag of tricks and you come to this place and the bag of tricks is no longer fitting. Like, do you become an expert in a new space? Or do you just move on and try to find a different partner? And I think the better answer is usually the second one, especially in connectivity, because there's so much need, there's so many places you can go. But this is really hard for our colleagues in other areas where, like HCI, where, you know, ostensibly it's all within the bundle, and people get pulled down into becoming experts all over the place.
Here's a question from Yes, about making technology and deployment sustainable. Who runs it? Who pays for it to be sustainable? And I'm going to actually connect this question in as well into the funding question. So this is a huge challenge, and frankly, I think it's an ethical responsibility. If you partner with a community and you are working on deploying technologies, you cannot just say, sorry, the 3-year NSF award is over. And so there are real implications for actually being very careful about where and who you choose to work with, because you are morally obligated to retain a connection far longer than you would in many other research areas. Maybe Curtis or Martine, do you want to comment on sort of how you've dealt with what experiences you've had in sustainability, and what are some approaches you've taken to make the technology deployable and deployed over longer periods of time than, say, the window that might be needed to get the research done? This also has to do with whether we're extractive in our relationships with communities. Curtis? Martine?
Sure. I'll jump in.
Yeah.
You bake it in. And this is part of the discussions with the communities to start, are the expectations, what your funding is, how long that funding will be. And I think the neat thing has been, I think Leandro and Guifi are great examples of being able to build those systems. And then you start to do even research on the sustainability of the systems themselves. And unfortunately, that's not usually a SIGCOMM topic. That's something that I think there should be more of, because that really, really is important. And a lot of the architectures that we work under are actually, defined by the sort of money flows that are present as well. But yeah, you have to have these discussions, and you have to bake them in early. This network we're setting up with in Tacoma, just south of here, is with a Tacoma Cooperative Network. They're already taking their fundraising systems and having users pay for service and all these kind of things. And so partnering with an organization that knows what they're doing helps out a lot.
Yeah, I can say a couple of things. So, yeah, I remember once being in an airplane. I was young, and I sat next to this guy, and we were chatting. I'm like, "What do you do for a living?" And he's like, I sue the government and I make land wilderness, because once that happens, I never have to worry about it again, and they can't touch it, right? And I'm like, wow, what a great model for change, right? Like, and so I think this actually applies to a lot of social good, which is there are things that you can do that you can walk away from meaningfully. And a lot of that has to do with policy. And so I would say maybe 70% of the work that we do is that. So for example, if you get a community access to Spectrum and you give it to them, it's theirs. Now, will they use it? I don't know, but they have it, right? If you lobby the government to bring backhaul in or set up a microwave tower, like, you know, but as part of core infrastructure, like, you know, again, it's a net benefit. And so I do think if you're interested in social good, you should look for things that basically change the way the world is in this kind of idempotent way, you know, and you kind of, you know, in this kind of stateless way. That said, every deployment we do, you always create local capability. What I've found really great is every tribe, for example, has like a local IT person who's actually great, you know, and they're like super smart and they know what they're doing and they can be trained and they're happy to be trained. And there's a whole bunch of partners that are also used to working with them and they get paid and they're there. And so there's a ton of infrastructure that you can draft on. You just need to make sure that you're engaging with all of it rather than just kind of coming with your widget, dropping it off and you know, hoping things persist.
Yeah, I wanted to, Leandro.
Well, I lost you. I'm not sure if your connection is flaky.
She warned us about this. Yeah, just go ahead.
Okay, so just one comment to the flow of discussion is sometimes we think about what we bring, but also we can get quite a lot. I mean, when it comes to sustainability, sometimes if you contact a community that has succeeded to create a network infrastructure to some extent, you can learn quite a lot from them. You can extract new knowledge that they have produced. You can help them to generalize it. And for instance, some years ago, I realized about the Ostrom's model of commons, and well, it was a great read, and I was not aware, and you could take a lot of lessons from that. And also we found a guy who developed his own mesh routing protocol, and at the university we helped him to do a PhD and translate that work into papers and share it with the community. So there's a kind of huge source of new solutions that we can help to formalize and generalize, which is also really nice.
So I want to, now that my Wi-Fi is back, I want to raise a question about whether SIGCOMM is a welcoming venue for work in the networking and social good space. And Martine was laughing. I'm not quite, I can think of several reasons why. And Curtis, I think you alluded as well to the you know, not having to produce a SIGCOMM paper as part of your expectations or non-expectations in your faculty job, which also means that you would have considered it, I think, to be a challenge to produce a SIGCOMM paper. So, so I guess this isn't really, although I've said it as a yes/no question. What I really want to do is talk about. Well, I guess, should SIGCOMM try to become welcoming to this kind of work? And if so, what would that require? And if not, then, you know, where are the forums that are doing a good job of being welcoming to the work? So who would like to jump in on that?
I guess I was called out, so I can answer a little bit. Yeah, there's certainly a tension here. I'll say I have not published at SIGCOMM. This is actually my first SIGCOMM, which was, you know, I'm here because of the panel. But obviously I like the material. I'm a networking researcher. It's the venues that we typically publish, the highest profile is probably Mobicom. And, you know, they are more application focused and they are more sort of deployment focused, and they're less data center focused is another big piece of it. You know, I think you'll see, like, even in this room, this networking for social group are all doing kind of access questions, which I think there are other things outside of that, but they're not typically within the domain of a SIGCOMM. Whether SIGCOMM should do that or not, I mean, there are venues, these are friendly places, and our work does get published. If SIGCOMM would like to expand in those kind of directions, there's certainly appetite to do it. My favorite piece of this is how much is going on in industry or pseudo industry. I think Martine's mural network is, I think, one of those examples I use to show of kind of motion and energy and money and flow. And there's things like the Google Chrome Access team. There's a Next Billion Users team. There's the Access team at Facebook. And so, you know, there are a lot of networking researchers working on these kind of things, but it's not usually here.
Mm-hmm. Martine? Yeah, go ahead, Leandro.
Yeah, maybe one comment is that I suppose that SIGCOMM could be a good environment. The only drawback I would say is that it's my impression is that it's too focused on the mainstream networking sector. So if you look at for instance the universities or the institutions or the companies involved, they look at problems that appear on the mainstream networking model, which serves for, let's say, to some extent, for 50% of the global population, but that doesn't seem to work so far for the remaining half of the world. So how do we serve those? Which place do we have to go? I would say that at least this is something that we discuss in the Gaia working group in IRTF. That's probably related to what people do in IGF, in the Internet Governance Forum. Or for instance, our community networks meet together in the Wireless Battle Mesh, which is a workshop where they discuss about mesh networking, you know, and related aspects. So there are other environments, but I could see this year there is one paper that talks about the public core, which is close to what we are discussing.
Yeah. Yes, and I think that is an unusual paper for SIGCOMM to take, and you know, to my mind, you know, we can keep, and we will keep writing papers about making networks faster and lower latency and bigger, but you know, at some point we're really missing something about equity and the role of networking in equity issues. So, and Darlene Fisher posted a question in the chat about working with social scientists. You know, it is a different mode of working, and in my view, it's gonna take a lot of care in program committee selection for there to be progress made in SIGCOMM and other under the SIGCOMM umbrella conferences, because otherwise, you know, you'll get review, like I got a review saying access is not an important problem. I mean, okay, I guess for some people it's not, but you know, that's a little stunning, right? Given the data that we know is out there and about access.
I can also, I mean, I think one of the mismatches is, I think if you do this type of work, you've got to kind of stop worrying and fall in love with a heavy tail, right? Because like almost all social good work is tackling, which I find a much more difficult problem, which is, you know, this part of the distribution, which if you pull a problem at random in social good, guaranteed it's in the tail, like, you know? And so ironically, like SIGCOMM, like just likes these kind of like, you know, problems in the head, even though like the world is tackling problems in the tail. And so, you know, whether it's kind of, you know, work that I've done, you know, in previous lives at like Nicira or VMware or even the mural work, if you write a paper on it, let's say we've deployed something for 3 years and you write a paper on it, like the paper is like, here are the design choices that we made in this kind of like tale of complexity, and there were economic trade-offs and there were social trade-offs, and like that's the paper. And if you took an integral over all of those problems, you'd be like, wow, there's a lot of problems solved, but there's no single problem that's like, you know, like we've cracked, right? And so in the past, and you know, I haven't actually read SIGCOMM papers in a few years, but in the past, you know, like OSDI or SOSP or NSDI, they're like, we appreciate the problems in the tail, right? Because they're hard, and we know that if you take an integral over those, that's a big value. But that just hasn't been his SIGCOMM thing. Like SIGCOMM likes, like, well, at least the aesthetic that I'm used to. And so I miss everybody here, and I'm glad to be back. But I do think an appreciation for those that have spent years chewing away at like non-interesting independent problems, but tackled a whole hell of a lot of them, should be, you know, considered highly.
Yeah.
And just to interject with a little bit of positivity, like things like our MobiCom paper, things like our NSDI paper, the things that have been appreciated, I think it's more systemsy, are like big deployments. If there's a lot of numbers, if like you've just done a shit ton of work and it's clear, like they will take that paper. And so there is a space to do this. It's a lot of work. And it's, you know,
Right.
we're only chunking out that little technical bit to push to NSDI, as much as Martin's making that point of like thousands of meetings with Globe Telecom. Do not get in the paper, but you can do it, and you can, you know, get a dissertation like that.
Leandro, would you like to jump in on this or any other topic?
Well, I would say that if you look at like a decade of papers from SIGCOMM, you can see that people is nowadays really on small details, so which is comparable to tackling like a small community and understanding their problem and coming up with a solution, and that combined to the that the usual suspects belong to a certain community where they see around. I mean, we are very bad in dealing with things we don't see, like COVID, for instance, but also like problems that are not nearby. So I know the challenge is that researchers from developing countries have very big difficulties to produce papers that are SIGCOMM at the level of the SIGCOMM. So we don't see that, even though they are there. Or so I suppose that as if research becomes more international, and if the usual problems get like exhausted, we can find more participation from these other topics, where there is a huge source of problems that are not in the frontier of technology, are in the frontier of society.
Yeah.
And climate change is one example of that. We cannot expend too much resources on solving a problem, because, well, we might not have an environment to live in. So let's go for simple things that work for billions of people as well.
That's great. I'm going to grab a question that showed up in a couple different places, which has to do with COVID-19. And, you know, has that changed any current work in the social good space? Are there opportunities that relate to networking and COVID-19? And I'll say one thing is that indigenous communities have been incredibly, in the United States, have been incredibly hard hit, disproportionately hard hit by COVID-19. Navajo Nation has one of the highest rates of cases and deaths. And so we are very much seeing that it's affecting our partners in extremely serious ways. We're also doing some looking at mobility data and COVID spread. So connecting together what we can see from location-based services about mobility and where cases seem to be flaring and not. Martine, anyone else want to comment on COVID-19 opportunities, challenges?
Yeah, I can quickly. So we're actually doing a bunch of like COVID response networks right now. Actually, when we started Mural, like the target was the homework gap, just because that was a hack to get EBS spectrum. So like our view was like, oh, you know, like kids go home, they can't do homework, but they do at school, and the school already had backhaul. So if we say we're working with the school, we can get the EBS, yada, yada, yada. So that was where it started. But the same communities that we're dealing with that now, if you're like forced to work from home, you're really in trouble, right? And so we've been able to do what's called, oh, I forgot the name, but I can send out for those who are interesting, but we can actually stand up emergency networks and get emergency access to spectrum. So there's a lot of dispensation in order to do that. And so we're doing about a network every 2 weeks in order to address this. And like actually the government has been fantastic around that. So I actually think that, I mean, right now we've probably got 30 in the queue. Anybody that is interested in helping, just drop me an email. We would love any sort of help, including climbing on buildings or whatever. But I do think that now is I mean, I think now we have everything in place, and we literally just need the warm bodies and the funding to put stuff up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, I don't want to contribute to too much damaging of the social good of the SIGCOMM schedule. So I'm gonna I'm going to end this, but let me say there are a number of great questions and comments on Slack that we did not really, either we didn't touch at all or we only started to touch. I'm going to go in and add some content to those, and I'd encourage the other panelists, please feel free to also add in answers and discussion in the Slack channel. Thank you all so much for doing the panel, and I think there are some really good, I hope, takeaways for the SIGCOMM community from the comments that were made and the kind of work that's being done. So all the best.
Thanks,
Thank you for running the
everyone.
panel.
Thank
I
you.
miss
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye.